peppering them with my own experiences in different parts of the world, and trying slowly to build, as it were, the foundations for the argument that comes much more in the second half of the book. Now, the reviewer in yesterday's Independent complained mightily that it was like going to a Chinese restaurant and having lots and lots of different dishes, each one of which tasted splendidly, but none of which left you full by the end of the 10-course meal or whatever. I thought that was a very, very nice metaphor. The problem is that we're all too fat in this society anyway, and you're not meant to be full. You're meant to finish the book wanting more, and go away and read more, and particularly think more. So the book is an experiment in terms of its style and its construction, but its message is deadly serious. Don't forget, even though we have someone like Barack Obama as President of the United States now, and whatever you think of him, he is a considerable improvement on what just went before. So warts and all, faults and all, abilities to swat flies and all, this man is a major step upwards. Don't forget, we could well have Sarah Palin next time around, and we're going to be right back where we perhaps belong. Perhaps we deserve that. Perhaps we just got terribly lucky to have someone who seems enlightened for the meantime. What is the true bedrock from our culture and our political culture that throws up alternately people of whom we approve, like Obama, of whom we now, at this moment, approve, and people like George W. Bush, and possibly in the future again Sarah Palin, of whom we might not approve, but of whom so many people in the United States will approve. We have, as it were, a considerable trek in the way we think in the West before we get our act together. And I think the basic complaint of the book is the impertinence that we therefore have in demanding that everyone else conforms to the way we think, when we have such a great deal of trouble deciding what it is that we think and how we wish to articulate that when you have a George W. Bush one moment, a Barack Obama the next moment, and possibly a Sarah Palin the moment after. What is somebody in Beijing meant to think about how the Americans are meant to think? How could anybody interpret us? And why do we think, we who have the world's greatest educational resources, why should we imagine that we can't make the effort to understand them? And that, I think, is the final, as it were, effort and mission of the book, to try to make the understanding of them entertaining enough, but serious enough, so it's no longer them. It's something that we feel part of ourselves. And in doing that, we trace not only our linkages with others, but we recognize that their linkages with us go back a very, very long, long way. And that's Greece and Athens and democracy and all of that kind of thing. We're always going on about our democratic heritage. Even now there's a great argument raging as to who gets to own the beautiful marbles from the Acropolis, because they're meant to be emblems of the very foundation of Western civilization as we know it, etc., etc. And quite frankly, they should be restored to Athens. But, that apart, how was ancient Greece viewed back when those marbles were first being contemplated? Well, Sparta and Athens were regarded as renegade and terrorist states by the surrounding states and by the great civilization of Persia at that point in time. So that the great Western legend of the brave stand of 300 Spartans at the gates of Thermopylae, holding off, by the Greek account, an army of 2 million Persians, is told in a very slightly different way from the Persian point of view. For them it was exporting a civilization which at that point in time was multicultural and cosmopolitan and extremely learned. We know one side of the story. Let me just give you a very slightly other side. Those of you who have read the Bible will know that there's a book in the Old Testament called the Book of Esther. It's one of the very few books in the Bible named after a woman. Esther was a concubine. The Bible makes her into the queen and she was probably only the concubine of an emperor whom the Bible identifies as Ahasuerus, and he was the Persian emperor. And at this point in time, the Bible story of Esther says, a great pogrom was being launched against the Jewish people who were living in Persia. These were the captive Jews after the overthrow of the temple, who'd been carried off into captivity before this same Ahasuerus eventually freed them. And the biblical book of Esther says that Esther persuaded Ahasuerus to promulgate a new law, making it unlawful for anybody to persecute the Jews. Now, in fact, this is a very, very partial telling, because historians know that this law that Esther talks about was in fact the first Bill of Rights. It was the very first document in recorded history to guarantee religious tolerance for everybody in the Persian Empire, no matter what the faith of people happened to be, and very much constitutes the first written Bill of Rights anywhere in recorded history. And this came out of Persia, today's Iran. Ahasuerus had a different name in Greek. We know him from Greek legend as Xerxes. The same Xerxes as Ahasuerus, who promulgated the world's first Bill of Human Rights, was the one who invaded Greece and was defeated by 300 Spartans. And none of us even understand or realize the back history of this person, who in fact was a considerably progressive and enlightened ruler, particularly for his time. When we realize how much certain things have intermixed, and how when later Greece invaded Persia underneath Alexander the Great, and Alexander himself became half Persian in terms of how fascinated he was by Persian culture, and how greatly fascinated the Persians were in turn by what he brought to them, so that during our dark ages in the Middle Ages, it was only those living in the Middle East who preserved the works of Aristotle and Plato, when we in Europe had lost them. And again, these great Greek thinkers, whom we take to be part of the cradle of our civilization, owes in fact to somebody else's curatorship in a civilization that we steadfastly refuse to understand, and whose animation, even behind some of the great and controversial movements in world politics today, we repudiate and excoriate. People, it's not just our rulers, the George W. Bushes, the George Cheneys, the Donald Rumsfelds of the world, whom we should excoriate for their ignorance. I think each one of us needs to fill our minds with a bit more knowledge of how different parts of the world live. If there are so many different takes on so many different things, can there ever finally therefore be a universal code of ethics by which we may all be guided in today's complex and vexed international relations? Well, there ain't going to be a universal code. Those days have gone, for the simple reason that what we declare to be a universal code, we derive from our own histories and our own thoughts here in the West. Other people who did not have the Enlightenment, who did not have the same philosophical tradition of ourselves, would derive certain ethical international values differently, express them differently. So what I'm trying to say is that the future of the world depends not on a universality, but an awful lot of damned hard work, in which painstakingly and with great respect for other people's cultures and the ways people think, not just the fortune-telling products, sound bites of how we think they think, we might be able to negotiate a set of common values by which we take ourselves and our sad world forward. That's what the book is about, and I'm very, very happy to have talked to you and to take any questions or points that you want to raise. Thank you very much.